On the planet Vibeslos Vi, a group of hooded women walked across dead grass grounds to a large golden sphinx that situated in the middle of nowhere and stood by the paws. They shouted aloud to the sphinx demanding to free their daughter from this sadomasochism filth, and all they got was laser shot at them from the eyes. 2 of the women were killed and other fled back to where they came from. They were planning for another go, but they need to penetrate it, and for that they need help to get in. They can only hope. The TARDIS landed next to a dead tree and the doctor popped his head out. The world he was seeing was quite grey and yellowish. It looked like a wasteland with a small town made of metal and plastic looming in the distance. He smelled the air and nothing came to thought. The place felt bland and a bit lifeless to his liking. Louisa walked out and looked around. She noticed the small town and asked the doctor if they could check it out. The doctor okayed it and the 2 walked off. Once they entered the small town, it didn't seem anyone was around. All the windows were boarded up and there were signs saying "Keep our daughters away." The doctor was curious by this, and once they headed to a well in the middle of the town they saw a hooded woman getting water. The woman saw them and quickly fled out of the way. The doctor in his polite way tried to get the woman's attention but to no prevail, and Louisa suggested they follow her to see if they can get some answers. The 2 managed to find the woman entering a hall-type building and the doctor approached the door. He knocked on it and opened it. He peered his head in and noticed more hooded women sitting in handmade pews with their heads down. He and Louisa walked down the aisle. He saw an array of candles and decided to lit one. Then the hooded women stood up and took down their hoods, revealing their blonde middle-aged looks. The doctor asked them what's going on in this town. One of the women, Betty, pointed at Louisa and said she'll end up like their daughters. Louisa mentioned the signs plastered around the town and Betty said that they will come looking for her. She had the beauty, the youthfulness and the hair color they desire. The doctor asked Betty who these people are. Betty said that recently a cult-like faction had arrived on the planet to give the female-dominated youth the opportunity of sexual freedom and pleasure that they've never witnessed before. Betty went on that she and rest of the mothers highly disapproved of it. They follow certain priorities. They have one child. They raise it to their degree and nurture them. When the faction presented their ideas to their own flesh and blood, their minds changed. The daughters began experiencing lust and desire like if they become mind-controlled. She then took a deep breath and continued. The daughters become sexual to their fathers. The women's life partners began to indulge in risque acts, even sleeping with them, and the mothers took major umbrage with this. They tried to prevent it, but it ended up like an ongoing plague and both fathers and daughters left them for the faction. The doctor asked where did they go. Betty mentioned a giant golden sphinx situated outside the town, and once they entered they were never let out. They tried to get in by force in their own manner, but time after time they got pulverized by the eyes shooting out lasers and killing a majority of the mothers. They quickly soon formed their own faction to take down the opposing enemy. They call themselves the Mothers of the Disappeared. The doctor looked back at the candles. He knew what they're for. To respect the dead, the ones who had fallen, and give them a light to carrying on to the other side. The doctor then approached Betty and said he'll get back the ones who were drawn for pleasure. Betty gulped and nodded her head. A large bulky man, head to toe fully covered in leather, forcefully opened the doors of the building and walked towards the doctor and Louisa. Betty told them to get out of the building and the doctor and Louisa escaped using a back door in the corner of the building. They raced out and a few more appeared out of various corners of the town. The doctor got lifted by 2 of them and was thrown into the well. Louisa got a gas-like vapor thrown in her face and passed out. She's got carried out of the town and went to the large golden sphinx. The doctor got up to the surface but he was stuck. He shouted for Louisa but realized she was taken and then banged his fists against the stone structure of the well. A rope came down and Betty called him to hold onto it. The doctor got winched up from the well by the Mothers of the Disappeared and climbed out. The doctor was not only going to save Louisa but the people of this town from the faction, and he started to sketch out a plan. Louisa's eyes open. The place she was in was golden with Egyptian feel about it and got her bearings. Her clothes had been removed and she looked round at where she ended up. She entered what seemed to a communal bath area. Fathers and daughters caressing each other amongst the crystal waters and steam. Louisa looked on uncomfortable what she was witnessing and then was greeted by a man called Horst. He welcomed her kindly and asked her if she was ready for her induction to Serenity. Louisa quietly refused this, but Horst insisted she should and she would feel a whole lot better when it's completed. He took his hand out and she held it. Horst took her to a large room which resembled like a small coliseum. In the lower pit was a table and Horst tells Louisa to lie down on it. She does so and then a group of leather-bound individuals turned up. They watched around in a circle at the top of the pit and then started to chant out a choir-like noise. Horst spread Louisa's open and penetrated her. The chanting grew louder and Louisa was looking up at a mirror on the ceiling. The mirror's image started to turn kaleidoscopic and she stared at without blinking. When it was over, Horst carried Louisa to a small pool to ease off in. Louisa then starting to a strange feeling and started embrace Horst. Cuddling first and then kissing. Horst groped her passionately and she smiled gleefully. What that induction did to her was now exposing her sexual desire to the fullest. Sort of a sexual awakening but more like an addiction starting to rear its head. The mothers of the disappeared showed the doctor to the large golden sphinx. He was sorta in awe of it but also baffled why such an Egyptian image was being used for an inclusive haven for pleasure. The doctor walked forward to it. Betty told him to keep back otherwise he'll be killed and the doctor replied with that he's been more than once. The large golden sphinx released a gong sound and then lasers shot out its eyes. The mother of the disappeared frantically scattered the place not to be killed but the doctor stood his ground. He gravely looked at the sphinxes with his hands in his pockets and strangely the laser missed him. The doctor walked to entrance and once he got to doors he got an electric shock from it. But this didn't stop him. He reached for the sonic screwdriver and swayed it side to side. There a loud bang and the doors to the sphinx opened. The mothers of the disappeared were quite amazed by this but they need to progress to retrieve the daughters and the doctor to save Louisa. The doctor and the mothers of the disappeared walked through the Egyptian-like corridor. Two men in leather approached them and questioned their intrusion into Serenity. The doctor brought out his black leather license holder and said he was an inspector. The two men looked at it and said it was a blank piece of paper. The doctor then slapped against the side of his head and quickly performed some Venusian Aikido on them. The doctor shakes himself and says he's still got it. Betty instructs the rest of the mothers of the disappeared to split up to search for the daughters, while the doctor and Betty search for the ones who are responsible for creating the faction. The doctor and Betty entered a lounge area. Fathers and daughters were lounging while canoodling. They were also watching a few couples participate in an orgy and Betty couldn't stand the sight of it. She ended up covering her eyes and then the doctor saw Louisa. He raced to her and asked if she was okay. She looked at him and asked if she knew him. He tried to convince her but it didn't go anywhere and then Betty recognized Horst. She told the doctor that Horst is her life partner and the doctor turned round. He wasn't sure what to do now. More leather-bound men came into view and captured the doctor and Betty. The leather-bound men took the doctor and Betty to this hall room where caped individuals were standing on both sides of the room performing sexual violence, whipping and even asphyxiation. The doctor looked quizzical and looked what was in front of him. A quintet of female humanoid aliens. They call the doctor forward and ask why did he intrude Serenity. They are called Viridians and the doctor wanted to know their plan for this sexual pleasure haven. The Viridians explained that they wanted to create a sexual evolution and had secretly visited the planet Earth. They took inspiration from history, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Marquis de Sade and the Folsom Streets fairs from San Francisco. The doctor said what they are doing is starting to corrupt the planet's lifespan and the Viridians scolded him saying that any planet needs a pleasure dome. Betty walked up and started scathing at them, forcefully taking her life partner and daughter out of her hands. The Viridians tried to silence her and Betty stood up to them fiercely. Before the Viridians can take action on her, the structure of Serenity started to crumble. The Viridians started to scream and in act of cowardice teleported away. The mothers of the disappeared had somehow managed to damage Serenity's structure and was starting to fall apart. The caped individuals continued with their sadomasochistic tendencies while the doctor and Betty flee. The daughters started to wake up from their trances but Louisa had passed out. The doctor covered her with his jacket and picked her up. Betty saw Horst crawling across the floor and she reached out for him. Suddenly a section of the ceiling caved in and crushed Horst instantly. Betty was struck by this and the doctor told her to keep going. The mothers of the disappeared were by the entrance and the doctor shouted at them to move out. They all reach outside and witness the Sphinx crumbling into pieces. The doctor with Louisa still in his arms had saved the daughters but not the life partners. Betty told the doctor from now on they'll continue as a female-oriented existence and the doctor just stood silently. The doctor carried Louisa back to the TARDIS. She felt woozy after what the Viridians and Serenity had done to her. The doctor laid her down on her bed so she can sleep. Before he was going to take off, the mothers of the disappeared along with their daughters called him to come out and wanted to thank him gratefully for saving them. The doctor said it was alright. It always something he does. Travel somewhere, solve the problem and fix it. Betty then presented something to him. A gold chain with a circular medal, and the doctor thanked them. Betty said the doctor is always welcomed back and he smiled. He steps inside the TARDIS and the mothers of the disappeared watches as it dematerialized. They placed their right hands up and afterwards walked off back to the town with their daughters by their side.